So, big question, is the finals ever going to have an esports scene or a pro scene? So, there is an organization called Breakout Esports, and they actually hosted a full-on tournament that lasted a couple months, and then they ended up doing Worlds for the finals. And it was extremely exciting. Embark was even there to support it, and it really shows that there is some potential with the finals. And so I decided to sit down with one of the people that do a lot of the back-end stuff at Breakout and ask them what they think about the finals and, does it have a future in esports based on their experience in the field, along with them having a lot of experience playing the game itself. So feel free to sit back and enjoy this interview, and then also please check out some of the links in the description below to check out Breakout themselves and my guest, Stars. So let's get into the interview. All right, thank you for taking your time out of your schedule to chat with me about the finals and esports within the finals. Do you mind introducing yourself and let me know how you got started in the esports scene?
Yeah. So my name is Stars. I actually started getting into esports around 2017, 2018. I was watching, it wasn't a six invitational, but it was a pro league finals. And one of the matches I was watching was Ents versus Black Dragons. I wasn't supposed to be watching it. I was in the middle of class and I was watching it, and I was just watching Kento Raketi just pop off and go crazy against Black Dragons. And it really got me into competitive gaming. So I ended up buying the PC version of Rainbow Six at that point because I actually had gotten a PC the year prior, and I actually started like just grinding Rainbow Six and improving. And I ended up getting into competitive scene when I turned 18, and I went to college, and everything kind of skyrocketed from there. I did really well in my collegiate league where I ended up getting picked up by an org, and thanks to my friend as well, Arms. I have to give a shout out to him. And ever since then, it's always been like a green light. We did really well as a team. We almost made it to the Allied 6 Vegas Minor in 2019. If you look at the Wikipedia for that, I promise you the game we lost was closer than it was. It says 6-0, but that was more on our end of us choking 5 rounds to Prime Rampy on Space Station Gaming. But apart from that, yeah, it's been great there. I ended up over time after a while just going into Apex Legends, competing there for some time, getting into some pro am tournaments and some professional tournaments. Give me 1 second.
No worries.
Doggo is going wild.
There's been a couple dogs that have interrupted interviews. They just want to yeah, bro.
I know, right? Yeah. Getting back to what I was saying, yeah, I've kind of just been here and there. I try my best to stay loyal to games as long as possible. Obviously, like a player's interest can only last so long. So after Apex Legends, I was kind of just off and about, and now I'm here.
Yeah, I was looking through your YouTube there, and I think there was like a title that said you had like 3,000 hours on Apex. So you've definitely spent a lot of time on FPS games. So I feel like the scene as a whole in FPS games for esports has always been like super interesting to me, especially when it comes to like the regional differences for certain games. Like there's been massive metas that form in like one region versus another. So I think when it comes to like esports, like yeah, I found a lot of interest in esports as well when I was a bit younger. I think like League of Legends was like one of the first ones that I really like got into, like this grand scale, like even showing my parents being like, can you imagine, like, look at all these people just sitting there watching people staring at a computer, but it's like here I am also staring at these people watching their computer playing games. Like it's just it really does kind of transcend, and then it really like inspires you to keep playing the game. So yeah, esports is honestly like such a important thing for like growing games and shit. So thank you for at least putting in the effort at Breakout and trying to grow the scene here in the finals. And I want to ask what initially sparked your interest, like from the whole Breakout esports. What got you guys involved in the finals?
So you're gonna learn there's two sides of the coin when it comes to Breakout, right? There's the impulsive person, and then there's the calm and calculated and observed person. If you haven't guessed, I'm the impulsive person. So I go to Craze in DMs one day. I'm like, "Yo, Craze, we got to take a look at this, bro." And he's like, "Hold on, I'll take a look, and I'll ask around. I'll do my thing behind the scenes, and then I'll get back to you." So anyway, so I'm over here just waiting and waiting. I'm already starting to think of formats at this point. Like I'm doing my research in other games, and I'm taking a look at the finals, and I'm like, okay, this can be this, this can be this, and eventually, like I'm finally convinced Craze, now is our time, right? So basically we just sit down, we discuss the format, we discuss what can go wrong, because the main thing about Breakout is we like to cover our backs, right?
Hmm.
So like for all the rules we make and everything are off of observation and what the players want, right? So for example, like for the ban on more than one heavy that we originally have, which we called our heavy clause.
Yeah, I think that's where it
We
started,
didn't
right? Was that the first like clause
Yeah,
that you guys said?
yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah,
remember
it
that.
was the first one. Yeah, it wasn't because of us. We actually observed in Kachi Rivals when they were a thing,
Hmm.
that when they're in their poll, people didn't like that. People didn't like heavy, heavy, medium, because it was at the time it was the best comp in the game.
Yep.
So that's where our heavy clause came in, where it reduced that. And because of that, we saw various different team comps. We saw a lot of light, medium, medium. We saw some light, medium, heavy, medium, medium, heavy, and then sometimes we even saw triple medium, which at the time it wasn't the strongest. But eventually it did become one of the strongest, as we know. So it added a lot of variation, and we were very, very happy with that. And when custom games finally came out, we had already had our video prepped for a format. Obviously, the format changed a lot as we went through, but our initial format video came out, pushed that out. We tried to push it to Reddit, all the socials we could get out to try and gain interest in it. And that's kind of how we began our journey in the finals esports.
Yeah, I think the bans were always like really interesting because the meta for so long was the same, and I think there was like FWL, there was like some other different discords that were doing pro scrims. There was even like the private ones, like the grinders one,
Mhm.
and pretty much across the board, yeah, we all had the same rules of like double heavy ban, and it's kind of like on the community itself to kind of create some of those rules for organizations like you guys to set those bans. And then I mean currently I think the rule for this last like grand finals and stuff was no double spec and no glitch trap or something like that, or was there something more?
Yes. Yeah, so the only ban we had here was no double specialization, so you couldn't have more than one specialization used because we just bought back the heavy. So heavy clause we ended up taking away. We removed it completely
Hmm.
for last chance qualifiers and the world championships because we felt that the heavy class was in a good enough position where we didn't have to have it back. Now, we ended up adding to the loadout clause, which is another clause we made earlier, that you couldn't have more than one specialization per class. And we added that because we understood that even though we're bringing out the heavy and they are balanced, the heavy class and also the medium class, depending on what you run, are still the strongest classes in the game. So to balance out how those classes work, instead of banning like gadgets, right? Because they also have some of the best gadgets, and banning certain weapons, we opted for the specializations because specializations have the chance to, as you saw in World Championship, completely turn around the game. We saw a lot of DMAT plays here. We saw a lot of winch claw plays that were huge on the cash out. And I would say after introducing that, I would say we were happy with the results of what the addition to the loadout clause brought to the competitive scene.
Yeah, I think it was really nice because I mean, for somebody who plays like a lot of ranked and stuff, it's like all we see is medium. A lot of the top players are just running like triple medium because it's super easy to get away with. And then we see the medium medium heavy, which from the tournament I'd say medium medium heavy kind of dominated, which was interesting to see that we're still not in any light era. There was a few lights that made it through. I know Uni and someone ended up doing phenomenal on light. They're kind of
Mhm.
representing the lights there, so that was nice. But when it comes to the game as a whole, like from your end, I saw you've casted some games, you've done production. For a lot of the other games, in comparison to the finals, how does the finals stand up from like a entertainment perspective? Do you find that the finals is entertaining enough to be in esports compared to some of the other games we've seen in the market, like Counter-Strike, Rainbow Siege, even Apex?
I would say it definitely has the potential to definitely get up there. Now, obviously, like there's different tiers of esports. Like for example, Rainbow Six right now is tier 2, while like for example, you look at Counter Strike, in League of Legends, those are the top at tier 1. So I like to think of it like tiered pyramids.
Mhm.
So obviously, like where we're at right now, I would say like we had the potential to be tier 4, tier 3 levels of where it's more like grassroots, right? So tier 3 is more of a grassroots. Tier 3 is like you're just getting started. And I think right now we have to start in the grassroots, because if it's not for us as a player base or content creators, we really aren't going to be able to see a tournament scene in the future, because one, grassroots scenes are important because they help determine one, the rules and regulations for the developers to be able to take, because they also take data from the grassroots community, right? But then it also shows developers, hey, these people have an interest in competing, right? So it's really important, like, to at least start out at the tier 4 level. Do I see the finals getting to the tier 2 level or tier 1 maybe in the future? Maybe not tier 1 as of right now. I would say not tier 1, but it would definitely have tier 2 potential to be up there with Rainbow Six, Rocket League, and a lot of other competitive scenes for sure.
Okay. So when it comes to like the gameplay and when you're watching the finals, do you think it's very clear what's going on? Say for example, when I first started watching like League of Legends, or even like when I've watched like Dota stuff and I don't even play much Dota, it's really difficult to comprehend what's going on. Why are they going there? What are they doing? But do you think that the viewers that are watching the finals, do you think that they understand what's going on? Is it, comprehensive?
For the finals, I would say the objective is clear. The main issue right now is just keeping track of who's who. Obviously, we have our own custom HUDs as tournament organizers that we use to discern what team is which, but the main problem comes with is figuring out who is what team, right? Now, if you're playing on the same region, I would say it's definitely easier to keep track of, because your colors don't change, right? Because through our research, the colors that you are assigned to in game aren't necessarily off of who joins the lobby first, but it's who loads into the game.
Oh.
So generally, when you load into the game, and obviously we could be wrong, but this is just off of what we noticed. So, for example, in inter-regional tournaments, the colors might change around. But if you're on the same region, we've noticed we haven't had that problem. So it's something that we're going to research a little bit more. But I would say objectively, the game makes sense. It's easy to understand. It's just hard to keep track of who is on what team because the colors switch around.
That's actually a really good point, because I actually remember watching the 12-mans like during the tournament. And yeah, when we went from one map to the next, it was like, oh, like I know orange team is this team that I might be rooting for. And then all of a sudden they're purple in the next map. And it trips you up because it takes a while till you start to like click. You're like, wait, no, that name is supposed to be on this color. So I didn't even think about that. Like it messed me up at the time that it happened, but I didn't even really like realize how confusing that would be for, yeah, somebody who's just viewing, especially for somebody trying to get into the game, trying to keep track of that stuff would be really hard. I've also heard from people who have hosted tournaments and who have done the camera work, like Waltz and Burrito who did that, is there's not a lot of tools there. So it's kind of unclear for them because they don't have like a mini map to watch. Like swapping between cameras is difficult. So trying to make it legible for someone that's watching is harder when the people who are, hosting and doing all the spectating don't have those tools to make it legible for players. Did you find that those were issues for like you and your team?
Yeah, I would say so. It on the other hand, the thing that helped, and this is something that happened this season, is they added a second spectator slot. So during LCQ, that's something we noticed, and it was in the patch notes. So we took full advantage of that because it's a lot easier for a production team to have. So generally in production, we'll have the observers, you'll have your director. Your director will tell you what shots they want you to take, and so now obviously since we're remote, I'm going to be 7 seconds behind the observer. So a lot of games we've done, for example, Gun Evolution is another major game that we've done when we were working with Bandai Namco. We generally had the observers talk between each other. Obviously, I would still tell them what shots and what angles I would want them to take, but for the most part, the communication is between them. So like, hey, we should look at this. Hey, yo, this person's doing something really cool. Hey, I noticed something over here. And generally, they would work together to make the production good. Obviously, during cash out, which is 12 mans, it'll be a little bit harder just because there's 4 teams. So now, we would have them split between 2 people. So basically, they're both on free cam and point of view duty, rather than like during quick cash 3v3s like you saw on the championship Sunday and playoff days, where one person was strictly point of view and the other person is free cam. So it's really, really up to the observers to make the show as legible as possible. Obviously, I was watching back your VOD a little bit because I like to take notes and see what we can improve. I do that for all watch parties and everything, just because I want to make the show better. So, and that's one thing I did notice. But there's obviously there's not much we can do at this point because the controls are quote unquote bare bones. But that's also because it's not Embark not caring about the competitive scene or not wanting to make custom games better. It's because they have other focuses on the game right now, which make the game better for everyone, right?
Then I want to kind of throw this to you. If there's anything that Embark can do for you, what features would you guys like in order to improve the experience for hosting tournaments and growing the esports scene?
When it comes to growing the esports scene and making things better, I would definitely say there is a list of things that we are looking for. We have sent some things up to them as suggestions because at the end of the day, they're just suggestions. They don't have to take them. But some things I would like is just custom colors, right? Mm-hmm. So custom colors would be good because as a spectator, we can now not only assign colors to certain teams, but now, hey, it matches their logo. So it's gonna be a lot easier for the viewer to keep up with who is what team, right? One thing I would like them to do is take a look at Apex Legends, for example, and their custom game lobby, just because there's different slots. So it's not just as you can see in custom games, it's all just 12 lines right together. In Apex Legends, for example, every team has their own individual slot and they can change said team name. And that would be really cool to add to the game too, because then now you have not only custom team names, but now you have custom colors, and it helps define who is what team. And I guess those two things together would be really, really cool to have. Obviously, we would like more settings as well, for example, region choice.
Yeah, I heard that from a lot of players too, especially for the EU versus NA. Those matches are tricky when it get West or North Europe or whatever. It's tricky.
Yeah, 100%. And I would also like the ability to have more rule settings. For example, locked loadouts during gameplay, how it is in ranked tournament and cash out. You can't really change your loadout. Obviously, I haven't played that much of season 4 ranked, so I don't know if it's changed. But when I did play, you couldn't change your loadout at all. And for a competitive side, it would be cool if they added a forced streamer mode, because one of the biggest complaints that we've had and biggest worries we've had is stream sniping and also not only just targeting certain teams, but also just having people scared of other teams as well. Hey, this team's doing really well, let's not push them, let's go for this other cash out, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know if you noticed, Scallywags got a lot of free cash outs during the group stage because the other teams didn't want to push into them because they were just losing all their team fights. So having a forced streamer mode would be cool, because then, although we have all those custom settings that I mentioned earlier, that won't matter because they won't be able to see the names of the other teams, and they'll just have their default colors that they will see. So they won't necessarily know who's who unless they look at their character skins, right? And character skins
they could set it to default as well, right? That could be a streamer mode that hides your skins, which has also been a thing.
I mean, that's cool too, but for example, look at PUBG and Apex Legends, right? It's skill based. Because if you look at someone's skin, right, it's hey, that team's doing well, we need to knock them out, right? Oh, that's the team we need to beat, right? So I feel keeping character skins will be fine because it's more skill expression and knowing what they're wearing. And it also makes it so, hey, we probably should change our skin this game so that way they won't recognize who we are.
Yeah, I think obviously you could take many approaches to try to avoid, quote unquote, stream sniping and stuff like that. And I think that would help so much just with ranked. But I do agree there's this whole issue with griefing and third partying. And if you're first place, you have so much control over the map, especially at the end where you can double up the last cash out. And you could end up just getting last place all the way up to second place just by, doubling it and then killing all the other teams. You can do that because you know who you're facing. You can purposely target out and grief other players. And I know when one of the tournaments that I competed in, it was like a single round elimination 12-man, and we were second place, and that is exactly what happened. The first place team ended up doubling it up and then just hard focusing us so that we would die. And they brought through a team that had 0 kills. They were like last place and they just watched them steal it. And it was like stuff like that feels like the competitive integrity is kind of like lost. But it is purely just because, yeah, like you said, you know who you're facing. You can grief that person out. Like the game flows a little bit differently. So that would be nice to see. Now, I wanted to kind of switch this over to some of the other games that you have seen grow. Like if you've been in the scene, you've watched it grow. I'm kind of curious, what are some of the things that hold games back from really reaching like their true potential?
I would say something, and this is going to be a little bit controversial, is one, trying to listen to the competitive community early on, right?
Agreed.
So while I am a competitive player, competitive players make up 1 to 2% of the entire player base, right? Now, obviously, that can change as the game goes on. Like, for example, Apex Legends at this point is probably, I would say, 40%, like, I would say a good 30% of the player base is competitive players. Obviously, they're still minority, but it's grown quite a bit for that game. But at the end of the day, you need the balancing. Yes, you can bounce around competitive, but that shouldn't be the focal point of the game, right? Like balancing, you should always be trying to onboard new players. And that's what I think Embark has done a great job of doing. Because if you look at the player count, yes, they do peak every seasonal update, but when they go back down, they're not necessarily losing players. Is their player count going down? Yes, but it's more level, right? So like you'll see like your 20,000 on, you'll see like your 22,000 to 20,000 on the weekends, and you'll have like what 16, 17,000 during the weekdays. But it's always hovering around that number because while they are losing players, they're onboarding players at about the same rate. And that's kind of what you want to do, is you want to make sure that while you're onboarding, you're also not losing players. And yeah. I think as long as they focus on the casual community, obviously they later on down the line, when if there is a competitive scene that does grow off of this, like they should be fine.
Yeah, I think the whole competitive versus casual is always like a very interesting conversation, because yeah, you obviously have to, make sure that the majority of your player base, whether that be 99% of the being casuals or whatever it happens to be. I think I've heard from the developers that the competitive or the veterans, the sweaty players in the finals make up about like 10% of their like playtime or something like that. So it's like playtime also kind of plays into a player base. So it's like maybe we're 5%, but we make up a bigger percentage of playtime. And I agree. I think early on, it's like some games have been trying to be competitive right out of the gate. It's like, here's our custom matches, here's our pro tourney, here's everything. Like, we got it going on, come join. And then it just, competitive players, I mean, you and I are probably both guilty of this. Like, we suck the fun out of games sometimes because it's not always about just having fun. We're going out there and we're like, okay, well, I have to do whatever is the meta. I got to play whatever is the strongest in order to win this game. And sometimes that just isn't a fun approach, especially on the receiving end. Like when you have like heavy CC stuff, or, Invis is a pretty common one that can be pretty annoying. Like there's tons of mechanics that really like frustrate players, but they're strong and that's why we use them. So it's sort of like the difficulty with balancing, I think, is about user experience. I think balancing for a good user experience is what you first start with, and then you get into the competitive balancing, the, pro scene, whatever, because oftentimes I've seen this trickle down where the first thing that competitive players are going to complain about, let's say when this game first started, competitive players complain about nukes, casuals didn't. Eventually, casuals started to hate it. Then we got a nerf. Then we started complaining about SA12 and how strong heavy was. Everybody thought heavy was weak. And then eventually they start complaining about heavy and it got nerfed. It's like a lot of the competitive players are going to reach that point of like, this is what's OP. They're going to find that before the casuals do. But the casuals are going to just disagree at first. But then you give it a couple weeks, couple months, all of a sudden they're complaining about the same thing you are. Because, yeah, experience comes with, understanding balance and what the issues are. And then another thing that I think is tricky is dealing with exploits. Say, for example, you played Apex. Did you play it like right at the beginning?
I've played since beta.
Yeah, okay. So do you remember the bunny hopping healing thing that everybody could do? Now it's like certain people can do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when that first came out, that was like a big debate of like, well, this is a skill gap, we should be able to do it. And then a lot of casuals were like, against it. I'm kind of curious, what do you think about those kind of mechanics where it's not quite like, glitching into a wall and shooting through it or getting under the map. It's not like that much of an abuse, but it's sort of this almost skill expression, but it is an advantage. Like, where do you kind of draw the line?
I would say you have to also consider inputs, right?
Hmm.
So on controller, unless you have Steam inputs or you have custom inputs to PlayStation settings, right? You can't lurch, right? So like there's no lurching, which means they can't bunny hop like we can on PC, right? Now, obviously, like they can, right? But like they can't lurch left and right, which means they can't turn left and right as they're doing it.
Yeah,
It's more like they can do it straight. So I would say, like, when it comes to balancing and looking like that, I would say you have to balance around both inputs when it comes to controller and mouse and keyboard to make it fair. And it's really a hard line to cross because remember, not like each input has its advantage. For example, controller has aim assist. A lot of people don't like going against aim assist, and that's fair. And then you have people on mouse and keyboard that can do all these crazy movements and reactions, but controller can't. So it's really just, especially since nowadays and age, ever since Fortnite was the first game to do it, it's really, really hard to balance between multiple inputs on one game. And that's kind of the thing that people have to understand is, while yes, some things do deserve to be banned, some things don't. It's the devs trying to find a good balance between both inputs. It's not necessarily skill between skill expression and something. If something's too strong, it's okay, is this fair for both of our player bases?
Yeah, so when like a game comes out, if there's something that is kind of complex and it's kind of taking over meta, what you're trying to say is just make sure that it's accessible for everybody if they want it to kind of stay in the game.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
Apex Legends moving while looting is a bug. Like that was never meant to be a thing.
Apex is full of some interesting tech. But back to the finals, how has your experience been with like the finals and the breakout scene? Like I'm kind of curious what the feedback has been from the viewers, from the participants, from even the rest of the team that works at Breakout. What have you guys been feeling about the finals so far?
At first it was a little rough, obviously, because it's our first entry into the game itself. People didn't really know about us. Everyone knew about Joe of Kachi Rival or Paradox of Finals Worldly, but no one really knew who we were. So there was a lot of kickback and backlash at the start when it came to rule set, because remember, everyone loves quick cash out, and we originally did want to run cash out. The problem was, like, especially if you look at our first term, we had around 74 people sign up. That means we would need around 18 spectators to be able to take in data and update it in real time, which isn't feasible for a small business like ours. So it was really rough trying to deal with the feedback at first. And when it comes to feedback, there's three types of players, right? There's the emotional players, where how we deal with the emotional players is we'll take their advice, we'll thank them for it, and we'll probably store it elsewhere because those are emotional responses, but they're not criticism with suggestions, right? And then there's a second group of people that know that there's something wrong, but they don't know how to explain it, right? And then there's this third group of people that know how to explain things, and they generally get the problem, but they don't understand the full problem, right? So it's really about getting the last two groups together, so that way we can get an understanding of, okay, this is a problem, we need to address this, and this needs to be fixed.
Yeah, I think when it comes to like game dev, that's even a thing where it's like players are good at finding the problems, but not always the best at finding solutions. And I think that kind of goes with most things in life.
Yeah, and 100%, that's something that we have noticed. Obviously, like as we've gone on, people have been more receptive to us as they got to know us. And we've gotten a lot more constructive criticism rather than emotional responses like we did at first. So we were able to make better rule changes as we went on.
So I got some feedback from some of the players. I wanted to ask them just a little bit about, their competitive experience surrounding the finals. And the majority agreed that the game is competitive, but it just isn't fair. So a lot of them are kind of mentioning that the balancing isn't too good. And when it comes to your experience watching the games, would you agree or disagree with the statement that it's competitive, but maybe not so fair?
I would say it depends on the game mode you're playing, right? Because a lot of what the top players are looking for is skill expression, because that's what defines them. They want to define their skill at the highest level, and they want the least amount of variables that hinder them. So, for example, when you look at quick cash, right? A lot of the top players that we have talked to and have worked with, they love the quick cash slash 3v3 format. And when we introduce cash out, they're like, yeah, we like playing it, but like we don't like the third parties and like how it affects us because of how easy it is to go from last place to first place. You can literally just double up a cash out and just steal it for the win. And that's kind of where we had to find a good in between for, because one, we wanted our tournament series to reflect the original ranked cash out as much as possible, which is why you see a hybrid format where you have like the group stage / switch stage when you had on Masters, and then you have the playoffs, which is 3v3. So we wanted to give them something that they did enjoy, but we also wanted to make sure that it kept the heart of the game, which is cash out. So when it comes to cash out, like that's why we introduced kill points, where you get 1 point for every 3 kill. Because now, hey, you're struggling to get the cash out. Well, now you have another way to qualify for playoffs. You can go for kills. That's another viable option. So it's really about giving players another, like multiple avenues rather than only one. Now, if it comes down to it, in terms of balancing for cash out, which is probably one of the main issues I would see, is the only thing I can think of that could make it more fair is, hey, why don't we try having only one cash out? Which obviously sounds crazy, but now you don't have to worry about, hey, this team's not getting pushed at all, or hey, we're getting targeted. Guess what? Everyone's going for the same objective. Now, in due time, you'll have to adjust, obviously, either the timers in terms of how long the cash outs last, because they each last around 2 minutes, or you have to adjust the in-game timer to make the matches last a little bit longer. But those are all options. Those are also other things that could probably make it more fair. And that's kind of like, those are just my observations off of what I've seen competitively from the players as well.
Yeah, I think RNG is kind of the killer of a lot of competitive games, especially an FPS game. I'm pretty sure every FPS like competitive player doesn't want RNG. So I think that's why when I was asking them for feedback, if they ever mentioned the difference between, the knockout rounds cash out versus the quick cash 3v3 mode, unanimously everybody would say that the 3v3 mode is better. It's more fair, it's more competitive. And the only complication is like a lot of them will agree, the 12-mans is more reflective of like what the game is. So it's kind of a mixed bag, but 3v3s is definitely much more fair. It's, a lot more skill expressive. And the second thing that
No, I was just going to agree with you and just say that cash out is also unanimously like the casual's favorite game mode, I would say.
Yeah, it does seem that way. It is fun though, the chaos and stuff. Like it's very entertaining to watch too, and you just see these like big upsets. It's much more enjoyable as a viewer than it is, in there where you could potentially be that person getting the upset. But yeah. And the second thing I end up asking a lot of the Breakout participants was, what would they like to see from the game and from the developers in order to push this into a competitive level? And there's a few interesting points here from a couple of the players. So one is that Embark needs to financially support the scene more with tournaments. And one thing I do want to point out is they did do that with upping the prize pool that you guys had, which they ended up doubling it, which I think is phenomenal from Embark. I don't know if they added any more onto that, but $1,000 sounds really, really nice. So it's not, a massive financial support that other developers might be doing, creating an entire scene, but it's a sign that they're interested. And then there's also balancing was another big thing that people pointed out. It just needs to be addressed. We're kind of in a shotgun meta, and a lot of people kind of want to get out of that. The bugs and exploit fixes kind of need to be addressed, whether, being able to use your jump pad twice, or certain ways that specializations and gadgets interact with the environment. There's even stuff like the bug where like certain floors are, physical, you can't go through it, but it looks like you can go through it, and it seems to be caused by dematerializer. And we even saw that, I think, in one of the finals where it didn't necessarily prevent the team from winning, but it felt like it did. It was like right near the end, and they just couldn't get into the room because there's just this invisible ceiling that they can't even go through. So some of these definitely need to be fixed. And then another thing is optimization. because I mean, Kyoto does kind of kill a lot of people's PCs. Another thing would be better netcode is one I heard. And then, like we mentioned before, better private match options. So at the moment, the 12-mans use World Tour rules, and the 3v3s are quick cash. So we don't really have the ideal scenario for competitive. We have these random elements where ranked doesn't have, you know, the alien invasion. It doesn't have any of that to prevent some of the RNG and variables that could really ruin some people's, you know, specific strategies. There's also a lack of meaningful or impactful updates was another thing I heard. So a lot of the updates we do get seems to be like we get like 2 big patches, and a lot of the other ones are just kind of, you know, little hot fixes or something like that, but they're not as big as they would like to see. And then another thing that was brought up a lot was griefing and third partying being too beneficial and a little bit too easy to pull off. Like, it's very easy to grief a team out. It's very easy to third party, especially with looking at the scoreboard and stuff like that. So in your experience with playing the game and watching it, do you agree with these, or do you have any other points that you would like to add on?
I will kind of go, I guess I'll just go through this one by one. And starting at the top, like, Embark needs to financially support team more tournaments. I disagree with that, just because, like, my experience, because we have worked with other developers, like I said before. And the thing you have to understand is when you make an investment into a tournament, that means you have to regulate them, right? Which means you have to spend money on a whole another department, right? So you need an esports department, right? So now you have to pay people to do that. Then you have to have them spend time like managing every tournament organizer. And if they're not managing them, they have to be able to watch them in some form or factor, which is why we had those guidelines that released that people didn't like, right? Those guidelines, by the way, like, those guidelines are the bare minimum. If you look at other esports guidelines, they have the same restrictions and limitations, right? For, like, obviously, when you look at it, like $10,000 max for a year, that's crazy. No, it's not, because they're not licensed, right? A lot of tournament organizers, when they get licensed, that's when they can have bigger prize pools. They can do international tournaments, right? That should generally, when I say international, I mean in person. You can hold an international tournament online generally if you want to. But if you want an in-person international tournament, you have to be a licensed partner. So for the most part, it's more along the lines of esports drains money. And right now, Embark's putting money into esports wouldn't really be a valuable part of their time. Obviously, it's an option. And right now, I would say is a potentially good time for them to get into it. But solely saying they need to financially support team more tournaments would kind of be is more of a selfish want, I would say, because it's something that the players do want, but is it the best time for them to get into, right? You have to think about it, because is the game in a good enough state where we can do it? That's kind of the main point for that. In terms of balancing, that needs to be addressed. I can agree with that. Balancing does need to be addressed. Model has been really strong over the last 2 seasons, and it's kind of been wreaking havoc across the competitive scene, as we've seen in Split 2, the Last Chance qualifiers, and World Championships. Obviously, and I would say when it comes to balancing, Embark is doing a pretty good job with the buffs and nerfs. I would like them to buff more. So when you look at a lot of games, for example, Valve is really good with their games, because what do? They don't nerf. If they do, the nerfs are minor, or they don't nerf it that much. But if anything, they just buff, because their philosophy is, okay, if one thing's broke, if everything's broken, nothing is broken, right?
Yeah, that is the Valve way.
So honestly, like, that's kind of something that I really like to see in terms of balancing. So, and that's what kind of where we were when we started the game, where everything was broken. Like, for example, people were complaining about light snipers. People were complaining, and that's funny to think about, by the way. But everyone was talking about like heavy being broken, like you have with like the mesh shields and the bubbles. Then you also have mediums being able to sustain themselves through gas with like triple heal beam. It's just one of those things where I would say the meta is the most fun when it's the most chaotic, right? But you also have to keep in mind that when you balance it, it can't be truly chaotic. People have to be able to react, because people can't react, they're not gonna have fun. So it's finding a good balance between having everything be strong, which I would say is the best thing, and people being able to react. But apart from that, I kind of agree with everything else in terms of bug exploits, private matches, lack of meaningful, impactful updates. I would say the only thing I'll add on for that is you have to understand that a development cycle is not easy. Like, you have hundreds of thousands to millions of lines of code that you have to go through. And I have developed some games myself, obviously not the level of this, but it's really, really hard to be able to make those changes because, yes, you're like, bro, they can just change some values here. Well, you have to understand if you change those values, for example, like damage or the dispersion of shotgun pellets, right? If you change one thing, something else could break, right? And we saw that, for example, right? When they made a change and fixed one of the bugs, I don't remember what it is. Guess what? Now, if you have a riot shield and baton, now your shield is permanently on fire if you rock through a fire sword. So you have to understand that it could be as easy as changing a line of code, but you have to understand that all these lines of code are held together. So if you make one change somewhere, it'll affect something.
True. Yeah, I mean, like, we even saw the sword bug in the beginning of the season, I think is another good example of that. Like, they end up, like, buffing the range or, like, the hit detection or something like that, and then all of a sudden, the super dashes were teleporting the sword player around. Like, we couldn't even shoot. Like, they just would glitch out and then they just teleport. And, yeah, that is unfortunately the nature of it. I think, like, it would be nice if they did potentially slower patches, but ended up making them be a little bit more impactful. Like every 2 weeks, they do like something more significant. But I think the main thing is we see stuff like the model last an entire season being strong when it feels pretty obvious to try to address it early. So I can see where they're coming from, but it is definitely tricky, especially because the team at Embark is not as big as some people might think it is.
Yeah, we have to remember, like, as a community, that they're not a AAA studio. They're a brand new studio where this is basically their first game. And you have to realize they're not only just developing the finals, they're now working on Arc Raiders, which is another one of their bigger projects. So you have this small team that's being split between two games. So at the end of the day, we just have to be patient, right? If anything, like, I would say a good development cycle would be 2 major balance passes, one at the start of the season and one at mid-season. Like, that's how most games develop their games, and I think that's a fair thing that they are doing. They're doing a pretty good job at it.
Yeah. And when it comes to the knockout rounds, like the 12-mans versus the 3v3 rounds, I know we kind of briefly talked about this before, but what do you think plays better and what do you think spectators enjoy more?
Me personally, I think 3v3 plays a lot better and cleaner because, like we said before, it's skill expression and knowing rotations, knowing spawns, and being able to react. So I believe that one runs smoother because everyone is aware, it's all game knowledge, and there's less variables inside. But on the spectator side, we talked about this earlier, the casuals love cash out because that is the most chaotic game mode, and everyone loves chaos, right? That's something that's kind of been ingrained in a lot of people. Is like they love the chaos, they love the action. A lot of my friends love playing games because they love being in chaos. I don't, because I'm a competitive player. I like to be able to control as much as I can. I don't like not having control of variables. But on the spectator side, it's more exciting because all of us have ADHD in our generation, so it's soothing to the brain.
That is true. I feel like for me, when I was watching it, I like the format that you guys have done, where there is multiple rounds of 12-mans. It's not just like, oh, you got third and fourth, you're eliminated. You have like the kill participation, and like over a bunch of games over, multiple days, it's like this kind of tallies up, and then it shows, okay, well, you were consistent through a bunch of these matches, so you ended up being, the top seed or second seed, and then this team was very consistently bad, so it's like, okay, well, it feels fair. Sure, there is some random chaos, and maybe, Bertz doesn't win every single game, but they end up like getting third or fourth in one game or something like that. But it shows that they were very consistent among the whole thing, end up taking first place. They're getting tons of kills. So I think the format that you guys did was really good because I personally love watching 12-mans. I also love watching 3v3s. So I like being able to watch both. So I think what you guys have done so far makes the most logical sense, and I hope going forward, if Embark ever, ends up with more tournaments or we get more tournaments in the scene, it would be nice to kind of keep that format as a standard because when it comes down to the qualifiers, it would be really unfortunate if, everybody who's at the top 4 teams or whatever decides to just purely focus out Bertz or, a team that they think is going to be the winning team, and then they just get completely griefed because they're 3v9ing the whole time. So the format that you guys did was really good. And I kind of wanted to get into a little bit of the spectator system. So what are some improvements that you think can be added to the spectator system?
Some improvements I would like to see. Obviously, we talked about the colors early on
Mhm.
and the team names. I think that would be really nice to have. Another improvement I would have would, just being able to click a button like F1, F12, like our function key, would be really nice. That's something you generally see in a lot of other esports titles where you can just directly switch to a player. Right now, it's just you have to toggle through like 20 different people
Yeah, I
to get
saw
to the
that.
player you want to watch. And it's very, very jarring as an observer, as not as an observer, as a spectator. And when I say spectator, I mean like the general audience
Yeah, the
to see
viewers.
that. So that's something I would love to see is being able to just control it through just watching. And the only other thing that I can kind of think of right now is just getting rid of the bar at the bottom where it says
Oh,
like the
the
tough
color?
shells. Like it says
Yeah.
like the tough shells or the mighty or the kingfish, right? That's cool and all, but we as a spectator, we like to see as much as we can on the screen. That and we I would like it to be able to match this. It would be cool if everything just matched the aesthetic that the tournament organizer wants to have on their broadcast. And we generally we don't that yes, it is their team name and it has the controls at the bottom, but we know the controls at this point because there's only like 3 controls.
Yeah.
It's either switch between first and third person or switch between different characters, right? Or different players. Like this. So it would be cool to be able to hide that part of the HUD. Oh, and I lied. The last thing I would love is to have a global kill feed. As a player,
Oh,
but as a spectator, we can't see the kill feed. So it would be cool to have that kill feed that has every single team on there, not just your team taking the fights, but every team that we see taking fights. So that way we can keep track of, okay, this team is wiped, this team is dead, or even in 3v3s, okay, this guy goes down, okay, this guy goes down. And when I say that, I'm saying like, okay, we're spectating this team, we can clearly see it because their health bar is 0, but we don't know about the other team. So having a kill feed would be
yeah. There was like a couple things I was thinking too. When you mentioned the HUD, I've seen other games they have options for HUD. So sure, if you want to keep that HUD on, you can do that, or you can toggle this off, or you can toggle everything off, or you just want the kills, or you just want that. Having those options, I think, could help you guys because sure, maybe if you're just doing a little small tournament, you might want some of that options. For you guys that maybe you want to have your own overlay that shows, scallywags and it's this player, and you guys have your own custom thing, then you can toggle all those off and then show it. Another thing that I think would help as a viewer is a mini map. Like a lot of times it's hard to know where teams are spawning, what's going on. Even if it's a very small one, just shows a general direction. It could be like, oh, look, there's about to be a team fight happening here. So even for you guys, it might be a little bit easier to read rather than, going through every single player individually. There might be a little bit, it might be a little bit easier to read the map then.
I mean, I can agree with that to some extent. Like some games, yes, you'll nice to have a HUD. Like tactical FPSs minus Rainbow Six, like for example, Valorant, Counter Strike, they have the HUD, and because it needs to show where all utilities, right? Where is the utility being dumped? Okay, this player is rotating from here. That makes more sense because there's a lot more elements that come into it. If you were to introduce a mini map to a game like the finals, it would be very, very hard to do so because one, there's too much action going on, right? And
Hmm.
then there's also verticality, like there's multiple floors on buildings. It works in games like Counter-Strike, right? And Valorant, because yes, there might be multiple floors, but it can all be fit into a small area. If you were trying to fit the verticality of, for example, we'll use Skyway Stadium with Hospital, right? If you're trying to fit all 4 floors of that building into this mini map, you wouldn't be able to do it. So rather than that, I would say it's up to the spectators to be able to show everyone the entire field of the map so everyone can get a good idea of, oh, this team's coming from here. Oh, this team just respawned from here and so forth. It's really up to the observers. And that's why Rainbow Six is cool, because Rainbow Six doesn't have a mini map, but the spectators are good at showing, okay, this is what's going on here. This is what the action is. Oh, this is where utilities come.
Yeah.
So
I
it
think even it just having that option, say if there's like, we have more than 2 spectators, if it's like a full map thing, right? Like you could just have one screen that your spectators can look at, like, oh, look at the second screen. It shows the entire map just to show
Mhm.
like where players spawn at. And then it's like, okay, we know that, this player just spawned near hospital. There's about to be a fight. Because I've seen that in some other games where just like they'll have a dedicated full map just to kind of quickly look over like a whole brief of like where everybody is. And then they go
Yeah,
back to this.
Like PUBG and Apex, right?
Yeah. And then I don't know if there is a feature, but like when you are spectating a player, are you able to see enemies like outlines through walls?
That's a good question.
I
Off
want
the
to say
top of my
no, because I
head,
feel like in the third person you could, like when you're just moving the camera around, like free cam. I think you see everybody through the walls, but I think when you're like spectating players, you don't. But I don't know if it's a toggleable feature or not. But I think that could potentially help.
I want it to say yes. I want to say yes, you
Okay.
can. I can literally just double check right now. What am I doing? Yeah, you can. Yeah, as I'm pretty sure. Let me just no, so you can't. So you can only see what the you can only see what the players see.
Yeah, because like I've seen that in a lot of other games that I've watched like pro scenes of, where it's like you see someone creeping up and it's like, oh shit, you can actually see the enemy on the other side of the wall and you know something's about to go down. As a viewer, that's exciting.
Yeah.
And sometimes you might want to hide that information because it might be a situation that's more exciting when they don't know. But I think having
Yeah, I
that
think
feature could be cool.
I agree with you on that. Like, for example, Counter-Strike, you have the option to have it on or off when you're spectating people. So, for
Yeah.
example, if someone needs to clutch, you can have the outlet on for a second, and then you can turn it off when they're about to engage in the fight. So, I think that's something that would be cool to have in the game as well as yeah.
All right, well, I want to kind of end it there, but can you tell me what is going to be happening with the future of Breakout Esports and what your involvement is going to be for future games? And, do you have any future tournaments planned?
As of right now, we're done for the 2024 season. So, the end of November to December, we aren't going to have anything. I don't want to promise anything, but going into January, me and Craze, these are my other co-founder of Breakout Esports, we're going to sit down and then we're just going to go ahead and discuss what our future is. So yeah, if anything, you'll probably hear from us probably around, I want to say late January, early February.
And for all the people watching, is there anywhere that they can go to find you guys and where they can start to get involved in some of these potential tournaments?
Yeah, so if you can go ahead and follow Breakout ES on all socials. That's our YouTube, our Twitch, Instagram, Twitter, all of that is Breakout ES. And then if you want, you can also go to breakoutes.com to see our website where we have more in-depth data from the tournaments, which we are going to be getting out there soon, alongside any other potential information as well.
And then where can the good people find you?
You can find me at LuxGFX, LuxKSGFX on Twitter. That's where you can find me there. And you can also find me on YouTube at Stars FPS, ST4RZ FPS.
Well, I appreciate you sitting down. Thank you for all the hard work you guys have been doing over at Breakout. And hope to see you guys hosting some in the future.
It was a pleasure. And thank you for having me on.